This is The Baseline, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA.
Welcome, everybody. You're tuned to The Baseline. Callie Warrenshaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. Man, oh man. Basketball is in full tilt. There is the NBA. There is the NCAA. I mean, anything associated with an A and a basketball just means that we are in a good place. And listen, trade deadline, buyout, we're all getting a little bit closer. That's when you know we're down, almost ready to hit that final stretch and figure out which teams are going to be positioning themselves to make this playoff run for the season. So a lot of stuff to get into, especially with one team that I am, and I know my man, who I'm going to roll out the red carpet to, very eager to figure out where they're going to be when the dust clears out of the Eastern Conference. See, I dropped an Eastern egg, little bunny right there for you, y'all, to figure out who we're talking about. We'll get into that. Let me go ahead and roll out the red carpet to my right-hand man, www.shawsports.net, Big Kahuna PNC, my man, Mr. Warren Shaw, repping out of Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Holla back at me, Mr. Shaw. Word is that spring break started 2 months early for you guys down there in Florida. People are going ballistic out there. Just, no shame in their game, man. No shame in their game down there in South Florida. What the dilly?
Man, you really hit the nail on the head. Ironically, this past weekend, decided to go meet some friends out. They're like, hey, we're just going to go grab something to eat near the beach. So I'm like, all right, well, how bad can it be, son? It was Coronaville. I was like, what is really happening? Like, people out here living their only and best lives. And, I saw somebody on the news like, yeah, we're coming to Florida because it's like Corona doesn't exist. And that's exactly what it looked like. And it was a Fort Lauderdale beach. So I can only imagine what South Beach and stuff like that was looking like. It's wild. It's wild. So I'm just trying to keep mine,
Hey, you know how Stephen A be talking about, hey, how I like to be down there in South Beach. Really, brother? Have at it. You know what I'm saying? Hey, the red carpet is open for you right down there. Have at it. You know what I'm saying?
So yeah, it was a sight to behold. I don't think I've walked faster in my life, trying to make sure I wasn't touching anything or anybody, through that crowd to get to where my friends were. And then it's like, all right, we got to take a circuitous route back to the
but Shaw, you have to start wondering, man, are they really your friends? Are they trying to set you up? You know what I'm saying?
they knew, and the one good thing is that like they picked a spot that was pretty less populated, right? And they're like, oh no, that side is whatever. It's just a mix up in communication in terms of parking. But I was like, yo, why are there so many people out here? So very, very true. Florida continues to, try to do its best to secede from the union and get kicked out of the United States with their buffoonery. But nevertheless, we keep it pushing.
All right. Well, listen, man, speaking of kicking out, man, like we're still wondering about the Miami Heat. Are they kicking up? Are they kicking out? Right. But we're not going to be discussing the Miami Heat, even though the team that we are discussing did do something to the Miami Heat, which then lends the question, where are we when we talk about the Indiana Pacers? And I can't think of a better person, Shaw, because you the person who put us on. I can't think of a better person who really can keep us in the know, really dig down deep, is Indy Cornrow's contributing writer, insider for the Indiana Pacers, Caitlin Cooper. She's going to be on in a breakdown and to help us really speak on what to make of the Indiana Pacers. Like, what is their present and their future going to be like? I know you're excited. I'm excited to be able to get her on board to really break this down, brother.
Absolutely. As I always allude to, you want smart people who know what's going on with that team when you're talking about the team in the way that we need to at this stage as we inch closer to the trade deadline. So she's one of the best out there covering the Pacers. She's also she does a podcast as well too with a good friend of mine, Mark, as well too, who covers the Pacers. And together they're dynamite when they do that show. I think she might only come on once a month or something like that too. But either way, they just know what they're doing, and it's great to have that conversation talking about the Pacers this week.
Oh, definitely. And listen, her knowledge of the Pacers is so good that maybe she only needs to be on once a month because we are only deserving of such vital information, right? Yeah. Like she's like, I'm dropping it for you now. I will see you in 30 days.
Yeah, she'd be given that masterclass performance,
exactly.
When it comes to talking about it. No doubt.
Hey, Spike Lee, hook it up, Spike. All right, so lots to get into, Shaw. Before obviously we'll roll out this great convo that we've had with Caitlin. some important things that are happening. But first, we got to do our plugs. As always, be sure to get at my man Shaw at Shaw Sports NBA. Get at me at GameFace Lee, the show's Twitter handle at NBA Baseline. Available on all the major platforms. You know where to find us. Just add the baseline to it, and then hey, put us on. We've got a catalog. I can say that officially, right? Because we got so many episodes going down. We have a catalog of shows, great interviews, great discussions. So by all means, not only with this show, but even our previous shows, kick back, relax, allow us to be your go-to resource discussing all things happening in the association. To find also those previous episodes, you can go to www.thebaselinenba.com. Online radio, yes, we do our thing on there as well, too. We ride with the peoples from the Nothing But Net Radio Network. So be sure to check us out Tuesdays, 1 p.m. on Dash Radio. So big up to our Dash listeners. All right, y'all. So let's get right into the news and notes of happening in the association. Obviously, the big news that's going around is LeBron James is out indefinitely. High ankle sprain, yada, 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 yada. Listen, when I hear something like that, Shaw, and I know usually you bring in the two cent and then I drop my 50 cent, but let me drop my 50 about this right quick. LeBron James out indefinitely really translates to LeBron James is out for a week. That's just what it basically comes down to. When LeBron James gets injured, I don't think too many people really worry about the injury itself. Yes, he may be in pain, and really the only person who is going to say when or whether or not he's getting back out there on the floor is going to be LeBron James. And so I don't know why everybody is like all up in arms about it. Now, if this is an Anthony Davis situation, then you might want to start clutching the rosemary, the rosemary beads and you know what I'm saying, go start talking confession, find a priest, this, that, and the third. Then you start worrying.
Wow, you took the words out of my mouth. So I guess we have the same 50 cents to share today. I spoke kind of offline with our good friend and friend of the show, Jabari, about this. I said, listen, he's hurt. Solomon Hill definitely rolled on that foot, and LeBron's in pain, but he stayed in the game to hit a three to make sure his double-digit streak stayed alive. So that was interesting. Then he went out, kind of theatrically smacked down a chair, which was
it's
awkward.
So bad, man. He really wants to be a thespian, man. I really honestly do. I don't know what it is with him, funneling all this money to executive produce and produce shows and everything. He might as well just stop playing games and just get on with his acting career, because he can't keep doing this to the NBA. The NBA ain't built for his kind of acting.
He gave us a little insight in Space Jam too, I guess. That's what it boiled down to. As you alluded to, thespian at heart, King James, bro. So I'm 100% with you. He's going to travel with the team. I think it's one of those, like, he needs a couple of days off to bolster his MVP case a little bit. So he's going to come back like Superman, and save the day for the Lakers and save them, from falling in the seedings in the Western Conference. But he's legitimately hurt. We're not saying here, next thing that we're being quoted as we said, he's faked his injury. Absolutely not. He's legitimately hurt and probably does take a game or two off. But most high ankle sprains, most players miss 10 to 15 days, sometimes longer, 3 weeks. And isn't it Christian Wood just came back from a second sprain? So he missed 3 weeks. So it varies, but LeBron is superhuman. So I agree with you. He may be back within 3, maybe 4 games at best.
His feelings hurt more than his physical. Okay. Yeah. So that's the best way I can basically describe that news and notes. Y'all just pump the brakes. It's all right. Go back to watching your daytime drama. There's more drama in that than worrying about whether or not LeBron James is going to be out for any extended period of time. My goodness. All right. So 2 acquisitions took place, Shaw, that's worth some conversation. The Miami Heat pick up Trevor Ariza. My God, this man just never seems to just fade away into the sunset. He is always on a basketball team. And the Bucks, of all teams, acquire P.J. Tucker. I don't know. Obviously, I'm more intrigued about the fact that the Bucks got P.J. Tucker. And how there was rumblings when we had our man Gerald Boguet on there, where he really wanted to see the Suns get P.J. Tucker, which I thought would have been an excellent fit for the Phoenix Suns. Where are you with either of these acquisitions, with Trevor Ariza being with Miami and P.J. with the Bucks?
I think Miami is looking for their Jay Crowder, right? That they got last year in the Andre Iguodala deal. So I think if you look at the opportunity to get more wing defenders like Ariza, even at his age, is still supposed to be. He's shown some nice playmaking chops in the latter years of his career, and he can fit kind of Miami's ball movement and offense. So I think it's a nice move, especially what they gave up. You talk about Myers Leonard and a whatever it is, a 2027 pick again. Sam Presti's like, hey, you know what I mean? He knows looking way into the future yet again. We joked about that on the last show, but yet he acquires another pick, in that same year. It's a nice move from Miami. In the deal, like some of the inner workings of it, Houston got a bunch of other guys, DJ Augustin, DJ Wilson, and some others. Torrey Craig got moved and he ended up going over to Phoenix. So Craig is a PJ Tucker like player, so Phoenix gets maybe the best they could potentially hope for. Obviously, he did a lot. He did a lot for Denver last year in their rotations. So I think everybody kind of wins. And if you're Milwaukee, even if Tucker doesn't really do a whole lot for you, you've kept them away from some of the other Eastern Conference teams that might have been looking trying to get them, almost like a Red Sox Yankees type of situation. So I think all teams win in this, and it wasn't too costly for any of them.
Yeah, I'll be intrigued though to see how the Bucks are going to really deploy PJ Tucker, because I understand that he's a 3-and-D type of guy, but I have to believe that he is there to be a physical presence on the perimeter for players like Kevin Durant and players like Kyrie Irving who like to live in there. So it'll be interesting because the Houston Rockets have done an excellent job fading him all over the place, right? But not really allowing him to be that bully like he was in the beginning of his career. So I don't know. To me, I would think that would be the most effective way of having a PJ Tucker for that type of team that the Milwaukee Bucks currently have, because they need that. They need physical toughness outside of Giannis Antetokounmpo. They're not going to get that from DiVincenzo or from Lopez or those dudes. So, but again, we're not talking about the player. We're talking about how the player is being used. And again, it's to your point, Budenholzer's strategy, he at times can be pretty good, but he's been on your hot seat. So how he doesn't use PJ Tucker might even further be an indictment about how overrated a coach he might be. And if, again, this winds up being a move that Horst makes that doesn't pan out for them to be seeing this Bucks team playing in an Eastern Conference Finals, oh, man, you talk about shaking that tree loose. What?
Well, the one thing I'll say with both teams here is that there seems to be a clear indication that they're loading up to potentially face Brooklyn. You get these guys as switchable wing defenders. You can point guards in a pinch or for a couple possessions as well. That helps. They also even kind of gearing up for each other if Miami and Milwaukee were to meet again too. So it's really interesting because maybe you could put Tucker on Bam in certain instances so that he's not blowing by Brook Lopez, or you're trying to maybe save Giannis and those things. So that's what I'm saying. It's a move that sets up their teams for the right now for sure. And you want to build the chemistry with getting them and built into the rotation. But it really is to match up against, those teams that you think you're probably going to meet. And even if it's Philadelphia, it's like, all right, maybe one more guy to maybe throw at Ben Simmons. But I clearly think they're looking at each other, Milwaukee and Miami, and they're looking at Brooklyn and seeing what's going on over there.
All right. So now, Shaw, let's kind of get into this really intriguing part here real quick. It's regarding around the trade deadline, buyout time frame of the NBA season. There's some obvious names that are being thrown out there. Just from your perspective, Shaw, who intrigues you more than anything? Victor Oladipo, Aaron Gordon, Evan Fournier, LaMarcus Aldridge, Andre Drummond, Kyle Lowry, Harrison Barnes. All these names are getting thrown out there, but who really sticks out at you as saying, you know what, I'm expecting this person to come in or come out, so to speak, and whoever actually gets this guy may actually, be a sufficient added piece that's required or needed, for that team to take that next step or even elevate themselves from where they currently are.
So let me say this. I don't think any of those guys, with the exception of Lowry, move the needle much in most situations. Lowry to an LA, Lowry to a Miami or something like that, that's holy shit. That's okay. That team is significantly better as a result of acquiring him. What's happening with Oladipo and even Aaron Gordon and some of those others where they're being mentioned, it's just kind of cursory. Oladipo might be moved to New York or might be moved to wherever as kind of a secondary stop, and then he's still trying to maybe make his way actually to Miami as well, right? Aaron Gordon has interest, from the Blazers, the Timberwolves, right, and even the Celtics to some degree as well too. Gordon to Portland, all right, that's a nice move, you know what I mean, and could potentially move the needle. But outside of that, at least from what we're hearing today, that this I don't think anybody's going anywhere where they're going to make a significant difference. Even if LaMarcus Aldridge and Andre Drummond are bought out, they're going to teams that can use them but don't need them, right? So whether that's Brooklyn or LA or either of the LAs, right? Those teams are good without them, but and can be a little bit better with them, but they don't need them. So I don't think they make significant impacts. And I get the sense that Sacramento's going to hold on to Harrison Barnes at this time, but we'll see. So trade deadline is always interesting. And I think buyout will probably be a little bit more interesting as well. But there's just too many teams that think they're in it, as we talked about, I think, on a few shows ago. And I just don't know how much movement we'll see with some of these large names.
I think because of the earlier trades that have already taken place, that the luster, right, like the shine on this type of at this point for the trade deadline, to me, is very subdued, right? Because I think some of these names are pretty decent names that if they get placed to certain teams, and obviously depending on, where those, of those teams, where they sit, what is the end game, so to speak. Maybe we spend more time trying to figure out what the end game is than worrying about whether or not they're actually going to do anything for these teams. But I just find it interesting because, at maybe some other season, any other year, I don't know if I'm talking about, whether or not Aaron Gordon is on the move, Evan Fournier is on the move, or even LaMarcus Aldridge being on the move does anything for me. Maybe probably because of the fact that all of these guys, I think, have had more than enough opportunity and chances that even if they're not good for the current team that they're on, I don't know what impact they really are going to have for whatever next team they may wind up being on. And that to me is the part that really gets at me. If they're being packaged in something along where there's a superstar player, then all of a sudden I can drum up some kind of, enthusiasm for their move. But none of these guys, to your point, Shaw, really are moving the needle for me about wherever it is they wind up, even Victor Oladipo, because I just feel like they've been given so many chances to really supplant themselves. And whether it's been something that they do outside, out off the court, or whatever it is that they're not doing right on the court, it does, with the exception of Andre Drummond, because I think Andre Drummond, again, and it sucks because he's being maligned. And to your point, Kyle Lowry, a guy that I think is great to help probably a team that really, really needs it. And to your point, if it's a playoff team, but man, it's just weird that we're at this particular point that none of these guys are really moving the mark when we're getting to this point of the season.
All right. And again, I think for Lowry, maybe I didn't mention Philly as well, too. I know I mentioned LA and Miami, but if he goes there, that's like, all right, you have to take that team even more seriously.
Yeah, exactly. But it has to be a team that is completely set up to not set him up, right? Like, that's where I'm coming from. Like, he's not coming in there to put something. He is shoring up something clearly that is going to be at a disadvantage going into the playoffs against the upper echelon teams. He will plug in those holes.
So let me say this. One of the things I think that's going to happen with this trade deadline, and I think the conferences are going to be a little bit different. I think Western teams are definitely going to be trying to do stuff, because they maybe think maybe the Lakers are not quite as good, especially since, they're battling the injuries. So maybe you feel like there's a window there. And I think West teams are going to be anxious to try to do something. In the East, I think the teams that are going to make moves have already made moves, Milwaukee, Miami, and then Brooklyn will still try to add things probably on the edges through the buyout market, Philly probably the same way. But I think if you're looking from 4 on down, you're looking at your Atlantas, your Indianas, your Torontos, your Bostons, all of those teams, in that mix. I don't know if there's a whole lot for them to do. Atlanta's making some noise about what they want to do with John Collins, but listen, they're as we record, on an 8-game winning streak. Now, they haven't played the hardest opponents, but they've won 8 straight under Nate McMillan. So Do you disrupt that chemistry that you've climbed out of basically the cellar and now are into fourth place, where a lot of teams or a lot of people thought maybe they could have been this year to begin with? I don't know, but I think outside of that, it's going to be, you look at Brooklyn, you look at Philly, and you're like, and you look at Milwaukee, you're like, shit, those teams are good. I don't know if we have it. I think Boston specifically, all the crap that they've been talking about, all the moves they want to make, there's not a move they can make that gets them into that echelon of the conversation.
And there's none of these players that are going to do it. There's none of these players are going to be able to do that.
Nothing
Right.
gets them into that level. So I think you save your proverbial assets if you're in that middle tier and just say, all right, well, we'll let the chips fall where they may. Unless you're like in Atlanta, like I said, because you do have some issues with which are going to end up happening with John Collins. But, I think Toronto, it kind of is what it is. You move Lowry potentially, and then you still, like we talked about them doing kind of a mid build. But outside of that top 3-ish teams, I think in the East, and you count Miami as number 4, if you will, because of the move they already did, I think the East is kind of a wrap. We know who the cream of the crop is out there.
Man, that's why this becomes interesting when I get my man Shaw on it, because then he really enlightens us to say, okay, well, there is maybe a little bit of a light at the end of the tunnel. Because outside of that, if we're just looking at this like straight up, it's just like, man, this vanilla, man. I'm trying to get that, you know what I'm saying, the Irish cream brownie flavor right now, and I'm not feeling it right now, right? Absolutely. You're tuned to The Baseline. Cal Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. Coming up, our interview with Caitlin Cooper, who's going to be breaking things down regarding the Indiana Pacers. You do not want to miss. But before we do that, got to make sure we get this in for you guys. From Emmy-winning director Antoine Fuqua and NBA All-Star Chris Paul comes The Day Sports Stood Still, the new HBO documentary that tells the story of the unprecedented sports shutdown in March of 2020 and the remarkable turn of events that followed, chronicling the abrupt stoppage of the sports, athletes' prominent role in the cultural reckoning on racial injustices that escalated during the pandemic, and the complex return to competition. The Day Sports Stood Still premieres Wednesday, March 24th at 9 p.m. on HBO and streaming on HBO Max. Stay tuned to our social media channel, at NBA Baseline on Twitter and at NBA_Baseline on IG for a chance to win a $25 gift card in partnership with this amazing documentary. So you don't want to miss out on the documentary, and you don't want to miss out on that. With that being said, you know how we do. You know how we roll. Let's talk Pacers here on The Breakdown. Time to break it down. To the bone gristle. Time now for The Breakdown. Cal Warren Shaw, The Baseline. And topic for this week is going to be a team that we have not really kind of delved into, and probably it's only right that we don't take the time maybe for ourselves, Sean and I, to delve into it, while this team really is a very peculiar team. I use the word peculiar because what they've done over the last couple of years, to me, for other teams in other markets, you take it. You'd be like, yo, this team is a stablemate. It's why the Eastern Conference is still being viably looked at, because you got talented players. And yet we're overlooking the fact that this may be a struggling season for this team. And I'm talking about the Indiana Pacers, and I think that there is probably one person I know of, Sean knows of, that I think can really get at the heart at and help break down why we're missing the mark on what we need to interpret regarding the Pacers, and that's Caitlin Cooper. She is contributing writer for Indy Cornrows, or SB Nation. Caitlin, thanks for hopping on board to help dispel the conundrum that is going in my head about the Indiana Pacers this season.
Hey, thanks for having me. Hopefully I can. I think that they've been an enigma to me for most of the year too, so happy to try to untangle this.
Well, this is a great platform for you to kind of let it all out. Like, why is it? Because I think that you've chosen the perfect word. Why do you feel like the Indiana Pacers, who at this time we're sitting here and we're having this conversation, a below 500 basketball team, but yet the talent has always been reflective of a team that is played above 500 basketball over the last couple of years? What are we missing with regards to this team?
Right. So obviously, I think the injuries play a pretty big part. I mean, TJ Warren only played the first couple games and then ended up needing to have surgery on his foot, and he's still in a boot, to my knowledge. So that's a big loss, especially with the way he had established himself in the bubble and really kind of expanded his game out to three and doing some more on ball. And then, they only have Victor for the first 10 games of the year, and then the trade happens. And then obviously, Karras gets diagnosed with the mass on his kidney and he's just now getting back. So, just having a lot of guys in and out of the lineup has led to other wonky lineups off the bench at times. And then incorporating a new system, I think early in the season, they kind of got a bit of a burst because the stuff that they were running is so motion based and it was new to a lot of different teams. And then as the season wore on, I think that scouting made somewhat of an impact. And then when you don't have another ball handler out there, whether it was Victor or Karras, teams really started ducking under against Malcolm Brogdon and kind of being like, he's an improved shooter off the dribble, but we'll live with that if it means we can take some of their motion away. Teams were crowding Sabonis and making his life a little bit harder and just not having guys out there like what we saw today against the Heat to have Karras that can ISO or to really get downhill. I just put a lot of pressure on them offensively and defensively. They switched through so many schemes that I'm not sure if it was the best season to have to do that when you're going to play 8 different defenses in a game, but
Mm.
that's my baseline for why I think that they're below 500 right now.
So, Caitlin, let's dive into maybe even a little revisionist history, so to speak. So, you mentioned, Nate Bjorkgren coming in here and shaking things up. Yeah, there's been some injuries, so whole nine. But is there any sense of, I don't know, just kind of doubt or like kind of misunderstanding with this team after letting Nate McMillan go? Now you're seeing kind of what he's doing in the first whatever 8 games he's been in Atlanta. Just talk about the difference in styles and maybe how the players maybe have even received Bjorkgren compared to McMillan.
Right. So, I mean, I think on a personal level, part of the reason that they ended up going in a different direction was, there was some rumblings that there was some locker room tensions and that maybe Nate McMillan wasn't diffusing some of that. And they wanted somebody, they kept using the phrase, they wanted somebody who could be a more modern communicator. And Brogdon came out pretty strongly in favor of Bjorkgren after he was hired and has really been in his corner. A lot of times after games, the players will say how much they trust in the coaching staff. But yeah, watching Nate McMillan with Atlanta has been interesting, especially with how many threes they're getting up. I remember they had a quote after the bubble where somebody had asked, or during the bubble, I should say, somebody asked TJ Warren, you've really expanded your game. You've taken 7 threes per game in the seedings. And he flat out said, like, Nate McMillan challenged me to do that. So I kind of wondered in the back of my head if there would be, if he would be a little bit more amenable to a more modern shot profile if he had been allowed to stay on. And it looks like, I mean, obviously you're tailoring that somewhat to the personnel in Atlanta, but they're not taking a bunch of mid range shots like the Pacers were. Defensively, like I said before, sometimes I do miss Nate McMillan and Dan Burke, who's now with the Sixers. They're more, militaristic, basic. This is how we guard our positions. We play a more conservative drop style. We don't react until much more reactionary than they are proactive versus now the Pacers. And just earlier in this week against the Nets, they switched, they blitzed, they went over, they went under, they played box and one, they played 2-3 zone, and sometimes they can have some mishaps in between those. I think I agree with Bjorkgren's overall position that I think in today's NBA, especially with how much it's tilted towards offense, that you need to be able to show guys lots of different looks. But the Pacers also have somewhat of an imbalanced roster in that they're either big in spots or too small in spots, and they want to be really aggressive in the gaps and shift off, and that can make it hard for them to close out. So you look at some of the numbers, and they've definitely tapered off somewhat defensively this year, especially after Victor was let go. So I do miss some of that.
Caitlin, and sorry, Cal, let me jump back in here as well too. So it's one of the things about NBA Twitter is, it's each team's fan base is kind of maniacal, right? And as Kyle's intro, I think even to Indiana is like, yeah, it's not a team that we cover, tremendously, but we're all consumers of the NBA. We watch. They've had a lot of success over the years, especially with McMillan, the McMillan years, if you will. But no team I've heard has complained less about not having all their guys. And you indicated that, I mean, it's messed up rotations. It's messed up what Bjorkgren may want to do. But to not have Warren, to not have Levert slash Oladipo, and kind of whatever mix you want to have, Lamb battling injuries, the whole nine, like we follow the Celtics, and all we hear is, "Oh, they don't have Marcus Smart, and that's the reason why. Oh, they didn't have Kemba, and that's the reason why." I don't hear Pacers fans complaining in that way. Is that just because we're too far removed, and kind of in the overall NBA, or is that kind of Pacers Twitter like really like, "Hey, man, making excuses for these guys not being there"?
Yeah, I think some of it is probably that Pacer fans have become so numb to how many injuries their teams have had to go through, whether it was Paul George, Victor, Jeremy Lamb tearing his ACL last year, Sabonis being out in the bubble with plantar fasciitis and missing that entire thing, and then TJ Warren breaking his foot. I think it's just sadly become part of the existence of a Pacer fan, but also, when it's out of sight, out of mind, and they hadn't even seen Karis LeVert in uniform, I think it's probably easier to put some of the blame on the guys who are playing and how they're being rotated or what the schemes are. I mean, I certainly don't think that if TJ's healthy and you have Miles Turner and you can shift Justin Holiday last year played more at bench 4 a lot of times, then you're not going to be playing Jeremy Lamb at the 4. Or, there was minutes in the one game, I believe it was at Brooklyn, where Karis LeVert was having to log minutes at the 4 because they have a hole there. There's nothing else they can do. But yeah, maybe they, I mean, I know that I've definitely brought up and complained somewhat that they're not in the lineup, but I think it's probably stemming from just the long suffering and hurt that fans have had to deal with.
It sucks that we're talking about how the Pacers are kind of cursed, I guess, when it comes to the injuries, because they seem to feel like the most extreme injuries, right? Like even when Oladipo came over and everybody was lauding the fact that, oh, this is it. Like he will find his way being an Indiana Pacer because it's kind of like he's back home. And then he suffers like this crazy injury, and everyone is saying, oh, the Indiana Pacers, the only way that they're going to be able to beat the Cleveland Cavaliers, who at that time had LeBron James, is by having Oladipo out there on the basketball court. And everybody just continued to overlook the fact that Nate McMillan really built a really good basketball team, a competitive basketball team. Yes, having Oladipo would have helped put them over the top, but if that team actually played well, they had a chance. They gave themselves a chance, and they pushed them to 7 games in that series, right? But ever since then, right, it just feels like any injury that the Pacers suffer through are feeling like injuries of the enormous brand to the outside, eyes looking in. It's like, oh, the Pacers just can't get a break whatsoever. But we're still not even talking about the talent. Like Sabonis is an all-star this year. But what does that actually mean? Like, what does that translate when we're talking about the Indiana Pacers? And I'm really curious from your perspective, Caitlin, like when you see what we've seen over the last few years, what will it take for us to transition to where I think you would like to see the Indiana Pacers become as a basketball team? Should they be leaning on the fact that they have, superstar, like star talent type players? Would you like to see one that's going to actually be the cornerstone, like the Reggie Miller, like a Sabonis era type basketball for the Pacers? Or would you just like to see a really great basketball team that pushes all of the other teams in the Eastern Conference to the brink and actually gets over and finds themselves maybe playing in the Eastern Conference Finals at one point or another?
Right. I mean, it's so tough to say because I just haven't seen it. Like, there's just no sample size of what this team can actually be. I don't know that I really think, as currently constructed, that they have like a top number one guy. But even in the games this weekend that the Pacers played against the Heat, if you look back at that series last summer, first of all, Miami was shooting the ball much better, and I don't understand where the 3-point shooting has disappeared to. But not having Sabonis, they really missed out when Miami was switching, being able to punish those in the interior or just have somebody that was going to have inverse gravity and really pull them in from the blocks and the elbows and open up those shots from 3. And, they saw in the first game the Pacers hit a franchise record 22 threes. Today they didn't shoot it as well, but I think they still made 15. That opened up stuff there, and just having him as a lubricator when they were sending double teams to LeVert. And the one thing I will say about LeVert, he didn't convert on a lot of his shots today, but because the Heat were blitzing him, in comparison to what Victor did in the series that you mentioned against the Cavs, Victor really struggled against double teams that year. That was um, as he became an all-star, teams started setting him extra coverage, and he would kind of have like these meek and mild passes out of it. And LeVert handled those pretty well over the weekend today, even though he wasn't, like I said, connecting on a lot of his shots. But I can see little ways between, and obviously this is just regular season, but in just that matchup alone, between having Sabonis back, having LeVert, who's a guy like he was being the one checked by Hero today, and unlike Victor when he was kind of limited and injured, he was being able to attack that ISO matchup and at least get to the basket. He made a big shot in overtime. That's a leg up. And then also, Miles is better this year at finding his spots away from the ball, not just like as a spot up shooter, but you'll see a couple times on the tape from today's afternoon game that like he'll use a dive assist to suck in defenders and then they'll get a corner three out of it. And that's not a lot of stuff that you would have seen from him last year. So I think some of it just stems from, they've done a good job of acquiring good players out of trades, and you have Sabonis that can be a connector. I'm not sure if they have this top option, but you're just going to have to hope that the fit can be good enough and that they can get enough movement and motion that they can be a competitive team in a playoff series. I don't know if I'm fully all in on that yet, but just in the matchup with Miami and what we saw today, if that was like a 4-5, I think I would feel better about it today than I did a year ago, or I should say 6 months ago when it was in the bubble.
So you spoke there a little bit about exactly what I want to get into, not having a unquestionable kind of like lead guy, right? So we see, I think I saw some stat where Sabonis is first or second in terms of like touches, like
Yeah.
the he's always involved in what Indiana is doing in terms of their actions. But counting stats aside, is Sabonis the leader and not necessarily the lead guy, or does that designation go to Brogdon just by virtue of kind of being the point guard and even kind of having a mindset of somebody who wants to lead guys in general?
Yeah, like as in terms of a locker room guy, I think that definitely is Malcolm Brogdon. I think he's the emotional leader there. He's calm, cool waters, keeps people even tempered, and just overall is just such an impactful and impressive human being in my mind. But yeah, with Sabonis, yes. I mean, he definitely leads the league in touches. He's pretty close up there with passes, similar to what you see with Jokic in Denver. And that one quote that I really liked a few weeks ago when the Pacers played the Celtics, Brad Stevens said, well, they're a mixture of the Toronto Raptors and last year's Pacers, and everything gets pushed through Sabonis. And my one counter to that would be no, they're pretty much entirely Nick Nurse's Toronto Raptors. I mean, their playbooks are identical. The only difference I would say is they use Sabonis like Siakam in on-ball face front attacks, but they also use them like Marc Gasol and dribble handoffs and in post ups and running just passes out of post ups like you'll see. But I mean, in terms of, I question what their playbook would be like if he wasn't out there because he's so involved in it. I mean, even at the start of overtime, he fouls out, Bam goes right at him today, and then they try to run a couple of their delay actions and they get turnovers in pretty quick order. Obviously, Miles ended up saving the day with those two huge blocks and just really locking it down in the paint. But when he isn't out there and they need to play out of pocket, he's kind of the security blanket of, okay, we can throw it to that guy and still get into a next action, or he can make a read, or, he can punish his guy down on the block, or he's going to draw an extra guy and then kick it out. But I think there's also been times this year where if he's against an individual matchup, like a Rudy Gobert or his old teammate Steven Adams has given him problems in the past, that if he doesn't have a physical advantage there, and then if the movement around him gets stagnant, I don't think he's somebody of the quality of like Joel Embiid or Nikola Jokic, where you're just going to be able to count on like, oh yeah, he's going to get us 30 tonight, or he's going to get that guy into foul trouble. Like he hit a little bit of a rough spot there right before the All-Star break where he needs the people around him to be able to move and run some split cuts to still be effective versus just completely dominating his matchup. I don't think he's quite on that level yet.
Caitlin Cooper joining us here on the baseline. Be sure to catch her on Twitter at C2_Cooper, rolling with Indy Cornrows at SB Nation. You bring up a really excellent point about, and I don't know if this is more Bjorkgren's philosophy with how this is happening with Sabonis, because I guess maybe in my sense, I harken back to how McMillan, and you mentioned the word military, like militarized, right? Like, it's interesting because that's exactly the first thing that comes to mind when I think about Nate McMillan. There is a discipline to him that I just can't quite understand sometimes, and maybe it's with good reason. Like, he's never been in a position where he's just allowed a player to be unleashed. And to some degree, like when you have like a Tom Thibodeau and he's got like a Derrick Rose, just run, like uses that player up until you can't use him anymore. Or Mike D'Antoni with James Harden and Steve Nash and those guys. McMillan was never like that when he had access to Sabonis. But Bjorkgren seems to want to like use Sabonis to that level, that capacity. Do you think that this could be to his detriment? Because we've seen a steady incline on the potential of Sabonis, but then when you just basically just throw them out there for absolutely everything, you tend to wonder sometimes are you asking too much of this guy, especially when you have him at the peak of what his talents could actually be like for a franchise team like the Indiana Pacers?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. That's been something that's been on the forefront of my mind since early in the season because they would play him really big minutes. He's not, I don't think, I haven't looked at this number, but I don't think he's right at the top. But at middle of the season, towards the end of December, he was leading the league in minutes. And he was also way up at the top in distance traveled. People always want to rib me because I wanted to point out many times on Twitter that he led the league in defense traveled
He's
or
he's
distance
he's
traveled
fit.
on defense
He's
as a
Fitbit's
center.
dream. Fitbit loves guys like Sabonis, right?
Yeah.
Like push him to the limit, man. That's how things feel like when it comes to Sabonis's involvement for the Pacers offense.
Right, and yeah, because I mean, he's doing everything. He's doing on-ball stuff. He's doing off-ball stuff. He's involved in all the screens. It's I'm doing a dribble handoff this way. No, I'm doing a dribble handoff that way, and also just asking him to be physical. So then the question becomes like what you said with Nate McMillan is a really good point because a year ago, there was nobody on the Pacers that averaged over 35 minutes per game. Like there would be some quibbles at times about, why is Nate McMillan still leaving guys out there in a blowout? But overall, I think he did a good job of like quote unquote load management by keeping people below a certain level of minutes. Whereas now this year, like it isn't surprising if you see Sabonis play 40 minutes in a game. And then it becomes the question of can he do all of that at that level for 40 minutes? And sometimes I think that the answer to that is very clearly no, because you'll see him get to the end of a third quarter and maybe a guy gets like 2 or 3 rebounds over him, which isn't it something you would have seen, a year ago. And then also, they tend to have drop offs in the fourth quarter fairly often, where you can just tell that the slump or the slide is coming, and their fast break points taper off. And it's like he and Brogdon don't necessarily have the legs to keep carrying the amount of load that they're carrying, especially when I was getting ready to say about the defensive end. He's getting asked to play up top and be really chasing as the four, going at closeouts, hedging, fighting over at screens at times. So you're also asking him a lot down there, especially when he's also your best rebounder. So if he has a long closeout, then he's having to come all the way back into close. So I think my answer would be that sometimes I miss also another thing about Nate McMillan is that minute strategy. I think it was better for Sabonis to play, 6 minute bursts at the beginning of the half and come out and get that rest and let Miles play more of the first quarter, or maybe let Miles play more at the start of the fourth quarter so that he can come in with stronger bursts, because sometimes it does feel like a bit of an overload. But I do agree with the overall way that Bjorkgren is using him. So in a lot of ways, I'd like to mesh old Nate and new Nate together.
I like that a lot. I want to ask, and not to kind of like hammer the Sabonis angle, so to speak, but a lot of it was made of just about could he and Turner play together, and obviously the trade rumors that happened with Turner in the offseason, and I'll even trickle that into Doug, right? And both of those guys to me are playing some of their best basketball. I think Doug might be playing his best basketball ever. What? How do you feel about the fit? First of all, of Sabonis and Turner's on the court together, like is it just hey, it just kind of has to happen based on what the roster is, or does Warren come in back eventually, or even with LeVert, as you alluded to, do they try to maybe suck up some of those minutes at small ball four, and where that those lineups don't have to happen as often?
Right. So this is obviously my favorite question. But I think overall I still land with it that it probably has somewhat of a limited ceiling because both of them, I think Sabonis and Miles have both improved individually and are expanded their games, like I said before. But and some of the crucial ways that they kind of need to for it to be really a good fit at the end of games, to be closing games with both of them. I think Sabonis is probably better off defending with a smaller radius at the five than he is getting exposed out at the four spot as much as what he does and really having to help and fly. And then with Miles at the other end, um, he's kind of up and down from the 3-point line. And I don't think that a lot of times teams, I mean, even in the first game against Miami, um, Bam was smashing down to Sabonis off of Miles and leaving him there. And it's great when he hits those shots, but oftentimes if they're running a double drag, it's not a 50-50 decision. Like both of those defenders are going to go with Sabonis. So then, if you had a more traditional stretch four who was really a credible threat in that way, maybe you're getting more balance defensively. But I'm kind of at the spot with it that if I was advising Kevin Pritchard, because of course you would want my advice, I would probably tell him to hold tight on it because I just imagine I see both ends of the floor and what system they're in. And it's very hard for me to imagine lifting Miles Turner out of this defense and thinking, that's going to be survivable when you're funneling the most or the highest rim frequency in the league. And they really want to pressure up on the ball and they give up so many odd man advantages. I think Sabonis would struggle to be protecting the rim without Miles soaking up some of those minutes. And at the other end, like I said, like Sabonis is so key to what they do offensively. And when you're facing exaggerated schemes in the playoffs and you need somebody to occupy or be able to run more actions, more on ball combinations, I think you would really miss Sabonis's ability to think the game offensively and some of the stuff he does there. So because I would have so much trouble right now lifting them out, that even though I think it's somewhat of an imperfect fit, I would want to see what impact Karras makes on both of them as well as TJ. And like, how does this look in a playoff series with this system before I would go moving either one of them right away, unless I was guaranteed to know that, there's some player out there that we have to acquire that guy because he's guaranteed to make us better. And I'm not sure that's out there. There just doesn't seem like there's a lot of star power that's going to be on the move this particular trade deadline. So I'm willing to wait and see how it plays out.
Caitlin, a couple questions before we let you roll. But the first question I really want to ask you, and this is not to put you on the spot, but I really am curious about where you are with this. If the Pacers don't make the playoffs this year, and I'm not even trying to consider that idea or thought, I think they're just good. They're good enough that they should be in it, which is why it surprises me that they're struggling as much as they are, minus the injuries. But if we're just going on the premise that they moved Oladipo, they got rid of Nate, and new Nate is, everyone is kind of feeling a little skittish about where this is going. How long do you think it's going to be before we start looking at Pritchard? I mean, do you sense the idea that the Indiana Pacers organization might be saying, all right, this is one move too many that we can take if we're not seeing an uptrend? Like maybe this might be the buffer season, right? Like you go through your struggles, but you better figure out a way to turn this thing. Like we want to see some improvements going into next season. Should this be like a fallout season?
Yeah, you know why that's really interesting is because after Nate McMillan was let go, Kevin Pritchard did an interview, and obviously the two of them are pretty close going back to their days with Portland. And he talked about what a class act Nate McMillan was, and he basically said like, don't put the blame on me or don't put the blame on him. I take that. Give it to me. And the quote was so weird to me because I'm like, what blame are you holding? Like, he's the one who's let go. Like, it was very strange. So, yeah, in that instance, and especially going back to the press release they put out about Nate McMillan when he was let go, they put his playoff record on there, 3-16, with absolutely no context of, like asterisk. Victor tore his quad tendon and wasn't available against Boston, and our other all-star had plantar fasciitis and wasn't available. So you're really putting a lot of pressure there when you let Nate McMillan go and put the playoff record there to then follow up the following year and potentially, not make the playoffs or be ousted again. Then yeah, who is carrying the blame there? My guess is what would happen is that we would be looking at how somewhat the style that Nate Bjorkgren is playing is a little bit mismatched to the roster. And I do really think that, I mean, they said they went as hard as they possibly could after Gordon Hayward. That was clearly somewhat in their plans. And I question how much of what Nate Bjorkgren was planning was built around some of that concept. But my guess is that players would get traded first. And then we would be seeing how that looked before the blame would be falling with Kevin Pritchard. But I totally hear where you're coming from because the way that the Nate McMillan situation was handled was very messy to me. So
So Caitlin, let's go some positive. Think about some nice vibes here. So I mentioned Doug McBuckets here a little while ago, but I want to see where your thoughts are on him and one of my favorite backup point guards in the league, in TJ McConnell. That guy is just, I don't know, I think what he's done since leaving Philadelphia, and especially this year specifically, has been, again, it's remarkable. I think with his physical tools and his grit and his grind, it's really great to see him going out there and hustling the way he is. But both of those guys are going to be free agents. So would Indiana consider maybe moving those guys while the getting is good, so to speak? Or do they just need to fit into this thing and, just like you said, play this thing out and hope everybody gets back and healthy?
Right. I mean, and that's a really tough decision because you better have a pretty good idea of what their market's going to be. I
Hmm.
mean, they took a little bit of a haircut because Karis LeVert's cost controlled and is obviously cheaper than Victor Oladipo, but I don't see Herb Simon being a guy who's going to be paying the luxury tax to maintain this team. So you better, like I said, you better know what the price range is going to be and whether you need to sell. But I think that, I mean, Aaron Holiday is completely out of the rotation now. So my thought is like TJ McConnell's been so important to that second unit bench offense. He's just like a basketball pirate. He steals the ball constantly, pressuring 94 feet. He can really be himself. His vision is good. He's great at probing. He's great at like what I would term as you think a lot of times of catch and go, and he's like a go and catch guy, and he really compensates for his lack of shooting in that way, and he's playing over Aaron. So I would think that they might look and poke around to see could we get a pick for Aaron before that they would move TJ, especially since TJ and Doug is together have really good chemistry. Always finding TJ's always finding him on back cuts, and Doug I would have a hard time moving on from because the dribble handoff chemistry that he has with Sabonis is just so good. Like that's basically the Pacers version of Bam and Duncan Robinson from last year. Like just knowing, okay, they're overplaying it. So now I'm going to screen the elbow for Sabonis and inverse pick and roll, or, oh, they're top blocking me. Now I'm going to scurry back door. We're going to do one or two different types of dribble handoffs and do a rescreen. And it just, a lot of lyricism and a lot of smarts there. So I think they'd be losing a pretty big chunk of what they're able to do. But at the same time, in the back of my head, I also think about the series against Boston 2 years ago. Doug ended up not playing by the end of it because Boston was switching everything and then they were targeting him defensively. And James Harden was really picking on him the other night against Brooklyn. That was pretty much the matchup he kept searching for. And then TJ last year against Miami did not play in game 4 anymore because they were helping off of his shooting so much. So another one that you kind of want to see in this system, how do the two of them look, but you also don't want to get caught when, potentially they're out of your price range and move on when it's a diluted free agent market and there's potential for guys to get paid when so many people are already off the board having signed extensions. So,
Yeah, and I think that's a great point, especially with Doug, rumored to have been shopped in that Hayward deal, right? So
yeah.
you just never know how he feels about that. So as I was thinking, I was alluding to a little bit earlier, you know, is part of that like the fire's been lit under his ass because they realized they were almost trying to trade him, and he's having this like really kind of remarkable season. But as they say, it's also a contract year on top of it as well too. So there's a lot that goes into that. Last one before I let you get out of here, Caitlin, and we really do appreciate the time here. Just get your Nostradamus on here. Where do you see this thing kind of shaking out? Are they set to make the playoffs? Like, are they going to be above that play-in game, or do you think they're going to just be fighting and scratching and clawing for their life? Because the East is a disaster. I think 4 all the way down, it's a disaster. So, just what do you think the Pacers are? How's it going to look out and shake out for them?
I think I'm one of the little bit more optimistic people as far, they are so up and down where they can have these 2 wins over Miami and you're feeling a lot better about them, and then they can't get a win over a Brooklyn team without Kyrie and without Kevin Durant. And my opinion might completely change based on, how they look against Milwaukee and some other top tier teams, but I think that it's still a playoff team. I think that they'll find a way back, and depending upon how much longer TJ Warren's going to be out and what he looks like, I think that helps them. But I can't say that I'm optimistic that they're going to win a first round series, especially if they're against one of those top 3 teams. I don't feel good about them in a series against Milwaukee, Brooklyn, or Philadelphia right now. So,
No, they're not giving you the warm fuzzies there. No, not
no,
not at all.
not enough there. Nope. Too many matchup issues, I think.
Caitlin, we certainly appreciate you really shedding a light on the Indiana Pacers. And look, I have hope. For whatever crazy reason, I have hope that no matter what happens, that this team will at least position itself to be the steadying ship that it has always been, even when people still keep considering the Eastern Conference the Eastern Conference, that teams like the Indiana Pacers stabilize our hope that they will be back on top and there will be, competitive basketball to be had. It's just not going to be always dominated by just one team from each of those respective divisions. The Atlantic Division, they sort of right in that ship. The Central Division, it's there, and the Indiana Pacers, whenever they're in the mix, that's exactly the reason why we look at how competitive the Eastern Conference is when there are 3, 4, 5 teams all in there just battling it out. It feels like rivalries are bred nowadays out of that Central Division, and we're just hoping that these extreme changes that have taken place with the Pacers over the last year or so will kind of even itself out, where we're seeing them being the type of team that I think we were hoping to see them kind of rounding out to be, and that it gives you reason for you to continue to keep doing what you do well over there at Indy Cornrows. Caitlin, thank you so much for hopping on board with us this week.
Hey, thanks again for having me on and listening to my long rambling answers about the Pacers.
No. This is good. More rambling needs to be had about the Pacers, because if not, then we're only going to be talking about the Milwaukee Bucks, and Shaw can't handle that.
I hear you.
Mr. Shaw. Once again, you've done it again, my brother. You have somehow, some way blessed the listeners with another awesome guest for the pod and for the show. Just awesome having Caitlin on, man. And now I'm even more enlightened about the Indiana Pacers. And at least, if more than anything else, I feel like I can, go and get into like a basketball intellectual competition. And just like you give me Pacers, I'm on it. Like, that's just how good the conversation was with Caitlin Cooper, man.
Yeah, as we said in the outset, kind of a masterclass on where they are at, what they're looking to do, where they've even been in a lot of ways as well. And she just has her fingers on the pulse of everything Indiana and Pacers. That team, that chemistry, that roster, just really, really great conversation. We were lucky to have her. We reach out and they have to be the ones that say yes. And luckily she did. And I think our fans and listeners should have a new friend and a new person to follow on Twitter. She's got a great content. You think she's great, just kind of audio, listening to her podcast. Definitely read her work too on Indy Cornrows. So loved having her on. Hope to have her again. And I think overall we did a nice job, putting this show together with the Pacers and talking a little NBA trade deadline primer, right? So great content for our fans and listeners.
Spot on, Mr. Shaw. So once again, we'd like to thank our guest, Caitlin Cooper, for hopping on board with this, doing a little breakdown, discussing the Indiana Pacers. And for our listeners, be sure to check out the new HBO documentary, The Day Sports Stood Still, premiering Wednesday, March 24th at 9 p.m. on HBO, streaming on HBO Max. Definitely do not want to miss this. From Emmy-winning director Antoine Fuqua and NBA All-Star Chris Paul, a documentary that is well deserved to be put out there in the NBA space. Definitely check it out. For the Baseline, Callie, Warren Sharp, we appreciate you guys. You know we do. And we'll catch up with you next time.